Welcome to the Peep Show podcast.
Your glance at sex and social justice.
With Jesse and PJ Sage. Welcome back to another episode of the Peep Show podcast. Today we bring you an interview with Red, a New York City-based Marxist feminist community organizer and underemployed sex working art historian. In addition to a discussion of the prison industrial complex as it relates to sex work politics, we talked to Red about the work they have done curating the art exhibit Whores Will Rise.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode.
Relevant to our discussion with Red today, on Monday of this week, Cyntoia Brown was granted clemency. To talk to us about this event, as well as other campaigns to free incarcerated sex workers, we invited Kate Diadamo to talk to us. Kate is a sex worker rights advocate with Reframe Health and Justice. Thanks for coming on to talk to us today, Kate.
Hi, guys. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for covering this issue. Very often when we talk about criminalization and policing of the sex trade, we don't really talk about people who are incarcerated on higher level charges. And when it comes to the major issues that are faced by people that trade sex, when we're talking about the criminal legal system, this is really an incredibly important issue. So thank you so much for talking about it.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about what happened this week and what the significance of that is?
Sure. So on Monday of this week, Cyntoia Brown, who's been serving a life sentence, she was sentenced to age 16 years old. Her sentence was commuted to 15 years already served. So in August, she's going to be released, but she's still going to be facing 10 years of supervised parole.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a long time.
Yeah. And, this touches on so many different issues, not the least of which is the fact that she was sentenced at 16 years old for committing murder. And it's so much bigger than that. She was 16 and trading sex under the control of a third party who was very well known in the area. So she was based in Tennessee, and she had a background that she said really forced her and pushed her. She was facing a lot of those circumstances. She came from poverty. She's a young woman of color. She was in and out of foster care and had been under the care of Department of Child Services in that state.
Okay.
And so at 16 years old was trading sex under the control of another person. Yeah, she picked up a client. They went back to his house, and she said that, based on some of his behavior, the fact that he had guns around, she did fear for her life. And so in a moment where she thought he was reaching for a gun to harm or assault her, she had her own gun and she reached for that and shot him. And when you have someone who's controlling you and who expects you to show up with money, she took the money that he had and went back. So because of that, she was charged with 1 count of murder and 1 count of aggravated robbery. And even though she was under the age of 18, she was tried as an adult and given life without parole. And this was a number of years ago. And so in 2011, they made a documentary. It was called Me Facing Life, and really delved into the range of circumstances surrounding her story, which was that she was serving time. And while she was incarcerated, she earned her high school diploma. She got her associate's degree with a better GPA than I had, and she was working towards a bachelor's degree. And really went into a lot of the different circumstances about her being a young person, engaged in a street-based economy and survival sex work. And the fact that when she was sentenced, she would be eligible for parole at 67.
Wow.
And so last year, there was a lot more attention paid to her case. It came back up in the news. A lot of people spoke out about it. Rihanna spoke out about it.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize that.
And yeah, everyone focuses on Kim Kardashian, but I was much more excited to see Rihanna talking about it and really saying, this is a severe injustice for this young woman to be serving. And she'd already served at that point 14 years of her sentence. And so with that incredible media attention, it brought a lot of people calling for the governor to commute her sentence. A lot of that pressure worked. And it's really inspiring and really amazing to see that these months of phone calls and outreach and really talking about this story did have a really serious impact. I think the other thing that's really important about this story is that this is not a blip or a glitch in the system. This is how the system works. And the fact that there are so many survivors of violence who are incarcerated for very often acts that they committed while surviving and while fighting for their lives.
Right.
This is the system. And I'm so excited that you guys are talking to Red. They are an amazing advocate on this issue.
Yeah.
And if you follow groups like Survived and Punished, and they really speak to this issue about the fact that, survival is criminalized. If you trade sex, you know that your survival is criminalized, and it's criminalized in a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
And this is just one example.
Yeah, I mean, it's so ironic that there's all of this discussion of and legislating around the idea of protecting people from human trafficking. But in these cases where women have acted to protect themselves, it seems like the legal system has no understanding or compassion whatsoever.
If you think Cyntoia Brown could have called up the Tennessee police and said, I'm a 16-year-old trading sex and I fear for my life, that is not going to get you very far.
Right.
It's probably not going to get the outcome that we think it would. And, people are saying, like, this happened years ago, we've really shifted. And that's actually not true. Just because some of the language might have been different doesn't mean these cases are actually going any different ways when they go through the court. One of the other cases is Alexis Martin, who is incarcerated. She was 15 years old when the person she was working for wanted to rob, which she considers, she uses the term, and so reflecting her language, the person who was formerly her pimp wanted to rob him. And so she went and distracted him by having sex with him at 15 years old while this other gentleman robbed him. And eventually things went awry, and the person that she was there with shot and killed him. And because she was part of that, even though she was underage, was also charged and received the same sentence of first-degree murder. She was 15 at the time, and this was only a few years ago. And so, we have the trafficking law. In that state, she was supposed to be viewed as a victim of trafficking, and she identifies that way. She definitely says that she was trading sex by force.
Yeah.
She was supposed to be assigned an attorney to help her make some of those decisions around what her case would look like, and had none of that. So all of these laws are being passed and all of these discussions are being had about, the shifting narrative and this and that. But she's still serving a 50-year prison sentence for an action that was committed by someone else when she was 15 years old. There is right now a petition on Governor Kasich of Ohio's desk for clemency in her case, and he has until the 14th to sign it. And It will be another 4 years before we get that opportunity again. And she also, just like Cyntoia Brown, has gone through the appeals process, has sat in front of judges and said, this is a wrong that needs to be righted. And at every step, the system has failed these folks. But this is right now the only option for a lot of folks. And so if you are inspired by what happened around Cyntoia Brown's case, please call the governor of Ohio for Alexis Martin as well.
Yeah, and his phone number is 614-466-3555. So that's where people can call and urge him to do so.
Thank you so much. And we have to remember that this is absolutely not an aberration. This is how the system works. And it's really important to highlight these cases and to call, because that really does make a demonstrable change in the lives of folks. Cyntoia Brown is getting out. This does work. And we shouldn't have to rely on it. And so campaigns like Survived and Punished are really important. Also looking at campaigns to push back on things like juvenile life without parole. The fact that juveniles are being tried as adults in cases that have 50-year sentences are all things that need to be addressed and can be addressed through policy, so that we don't have to individually call over and over and over to try to address these individual horrific cases.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing all of that with us.
Yeah, and just drawing attention to this as a pattern, which we'll definitely continue to talk about on the show.
Thank you guys so much for talking about it and for highlighting it.
Where can people find more information about your work?
You can go to reframehealthandjustice.com.
Red is a Marxist feminist community organizer and underemployed sex working art historian currently based in New York City. They are a member of the Support Hose Collective, Survived and Punished New York, and coordinate for the Justice for Alicia Walker Defense Campaign. Red's current organizing efforts center criminalized survivors, prison police abolition, and the decriminalization of all sex work trade. Red is a queer, non-binary femme who characterizes their work as existing at the intersection of art, politics, and labor. So welcome. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, y'all.
Oh, we're so excited. We met at the Hacking Hustling event in New York. That was a few months ago. And you were curating the art exhibit there, which was really, really moving. I think we talked a little bit to you on that special episode that we did.
Yes, I was so glad to have y'all there just to be participants, but also to help create a community archive. Y'all know how I feel about archives by now. To have documentation that is by and for community is so essential. So I really appreciated y'all coming out.
It was really amazing. I thought that the whole event was amazing, but we loved the art exhibit that you curated and thought it was really, really powerful to see a lot of resistance artifacts there. Do you want to talk a little bit about what motivated you to pull that together?
I have this tendency to save things. I have a tendency to save flyers, to save posters, armbands that have been worn. You know, if we carry flowers or literature at events or whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
I have this tendency to preserve and save because I have a very, I think, valid and real fear of various radical community erasure, right?
Yeah.
By the straight world in general, the state.
Tumblr right now. I mean, we're also seeing it on social media where these entire blogs are being erased, years and years of conversations in queer communities and images and histories.
Both analog and digital archives, our histories are actively under attack.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't say that to like fearmonger. I say that to just be very real about it. I mean, when I first learned about, Magnus Hirschfeld's library and institute, I mean, this is somebody whose research and archival work and outreach to community and safe haven for community, was quite literally burned by the Nazis. And so, to think about the ways in which non-binary, GNC, trans, sex working, queer, marginalized identity, just in general, the way that it's constantly policed and under attack, I feel very strongly about just maintaining and holding whatever pieces of those moments and movements and histories that we can.
Yeah.
So I do that a lot, which means that I am constantly surrounded by these objects, right? That for me are more than objects. They are the objects, but they're also these talismans of resistance and proof that we were here. And when I, was part of organizing International Whores Day here in New York, just naturally, because when you're an organizer, you get kind of left with things, like you become custodian of all the remnants of a day of action. So it just kind of necessitates like holding those things, right, until the next action. And so I was surrounded by posters and flyers and banners and bullhorns and buttons and glitter G-strings and shoes. And, all of these like really, really beautiful objects that prove that we were there. And they were screaming at me every day in my apartment. And I mean that, like I felt like it was a deafening din of those voices that had been kind of, I know this is sounding kind of meta, but like really imbued within these objects. And so I wanted them to scream at other people. I wanted to put those objects in a space where they could talk to themselves again and talk to other humans and rejoin the people that held them and carried them and walked in them. And that's why that show happened.
It was really powerful, I think, for PJ and I, too. I mean, we can only speak for our own experience, but walking in the little alcove where all of that stuff did feel really powerful.
I'm so glad.
I'm
so glad.
I mean, even the protest signs, like to even see people's handwriting to me seemed powerful because they weren't just things that people said, but it was like written with their own writing, things that people actually touched. I thought that was really amazing.
I was totally dorking out, walking around with my phone, taking videos of it, just trying to capture it in some, I don't know, more whole way that even still pictures didn't seem to do. And for whatever reason, when I saw the picture of Lorelei Lee that Molly Crabapple drew, that really made me tear up. I think it's just because I like both of them so much because I've read both of them a lot and both of them have moved me in the past. But there is something about that convergence of us being such a small community together there with each other. Something about that really just hit me.
Yeah, I think that there's a reason why we scrapbook. There's a reason why we maintain a kind of sentiment around objects that others that we either admire, respect, or have lost, or ourselves have made, or have touched or have held. There's something like really very necessary, right, about addressing like the ephemerality of resistance art and protest art, and then insisting upon its belonging to an art archive, it belonging to community in that way, to this kind of collective imagination about like what our history can be, what our present can be, hopefully what our future can be. And so there's something really special about putting someone's protest poster on a wall and insisting and demanding unapologetically that that is an art object and that it is worthy of your attention,
right,
of your reverence, of your participation with it.
I think it's also powerful too, in the way that the recent D17 events were powerful, just hearing people talk afterwards, and the one that we did in Pittsburgh. There's so few safe spaces for sex workers right now in like our current social climate. So to put on an exhibit like that is to hold space, however temporarily, that is safe for sex workers, that, where there is a sense of belonging, where people can come and be together and feel like part of something. And that, we're still at a moment where that takes so much work and effort.
Yeah, I'm curious, when you were talking about the fact that those objects were in your house screaming at you and you wanted them to scream at other people, was there a sense when you saw other people respond to and react to the exhibit? Did that feel like a relief to you in some way, or what was your like emotional reaction to that?
I mean, just completely overwhelmed in every positive and strange sense of that word. I was beside myself the entire time that it was possible that that show happened, that it was possible that all of that hacking, hustling programming happened.
Yeah.
I was just so impressed and in awe of community. I was so impressed with Danielle Blunt and with Melissa Grant and with Ashley Page and with Kiara St. James and just with everyone who lended their voice and their knowledge and their love and their anger and their confrontation with what's happening post Sesta Fosta. And that whole event really as a totality was very overwhelming, but also kind of indicative of this new climate, I think, of the sex workers' rights movement, because we're on the move in a way and in lots of ways that we haven't been in a while, or maybe ever. And because, movements are constantly evolving and changing, and strategy and tactics are always, in response to our current time. The show itself, in terms of the exhibition, Whores Will Rise, I mean, that just even a title like that, I was so unsure how people were going to respond to it. It comes from, a piece by my comrade Alicia Walker. Because I'm me and because I like starting fights, I was like, let's see how this like art institution I-Beam takes this, we're going to call it Whores Will Rise and just see how this goes. And I mean, to be embraced, I wasn't expecting that. To be championed and supported, God, I hadn't considered that, y'all. Like, I was ready for fighting. I was ready for argument. I was ready for a protest of the event itself if we had to. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, because you just never know. You
don't know. It's actually funny. I mean, I'm not an artist, but I was thinking as you were talking that I had a similar experience recently where I went into a media interview that I thought was going to be very hostile, and it ended up being really kind of lovely, and I felt very supported, and it surprised me. That whole experience surprised me.
I was so pleased to be surprised. I was so just thankful to be surprised, because it was kind of like, wow, I can breathe right now and I can create this thing in a way that's not currently under threat. And that felt really great. And I think that came through in the show, because to get back to your central question of this, the responses to it were just really, really great. There was so much love and so much support And I had long and amazing and difficult and necessary conversations with so many people just that night. And then in the subsequent days and weeks and now months afterward, I'm so thankful that that space was a thing that people seem to want and need and enjoy, even if they didn't have words for that ask.
Right.
I just appreciated all of the experiences that came out of that.
I think iBeam did a really wonderful job hosting, and I was also really impressed with just how much they embraced what you were doing and what the other organizers were doing. Do you want to maybe talk a little bit more about Alicia Walker and why quoting her for the name of the exhibit was politically significant?
Sure, I can speak to that. So my comrade Alicia, or Lily, as her friends call her, is so central to my just embrace of insisting that art and labor and all of these things like have to be contended with, right? And especially in movement spaces. This is someone who is so creative. She creates visual works on paper. She writes. She's both a poet. She does short stories, and it's part of keeping her like vitality about herself while she's incarcerated. And so I think that both honoring her in that title of the exhibition, as well as like making sure that her words and her presence were felt, were equally important to me as someone who's organizing alongside of her in Support Hose and also dear friend. I wanted her to be there with us.
Yeah.
Even though the state is keeping her from being there with us. Just so folks know, Alicia, oh man, where to even start her story? Alicia's incarcerated at Decatur Correctional Center in Decatur, Illinois right now. And she's been incarcerated, since she's 19 years old. She's 25 now. And she's been caged for all this time because she had so much love for herself and for her fellow worker that she was with. She had so much courage that she fought for herself. She fought against a violent client and she survived. And her fellow worker survived because she survived and fought him off.
Wow.
And his name was Alan Filan. He is a very well-connected white man. And his sister is a judge, and he was known to sex worker community as someone who could pay, but was also very erratic at times. And of course, this is all community information, but this is someone who was known to abuse substances while seeing workers and could be kind of a wild card. You just never knew what you were going to get when you saw Alan Filan. This was known. Alicia had seen him. Her fellow worker who was with her that evening had seen him prior. They had no indication that this was going to be that time, that they were going to have to defend themselves, right, against a violent attack. And he was obviously not well that evening. He began demanding unprotected sex from both of them. That was not their arrangement. They insisted on protected sex. They had an argument. He escalated things and threatened them with a knife.
Jeez.
And there was a skirmish. Alicia was fighting him off. He was striking her with the knife. She wrestled him to the ground, got the knife from him, and then the rest is why she's incarcerated. They got out, though. And when they left, he was alive. And Alicia's just like this, probably the strongest person I know. And, you know, for me, it only makes sense why she fought and found this strength within herself to protect herself and protect her fellow worker and friend. But when she went to trial, I mean, the shit that they published about her and the horror stories that came out of that courtroom. If you weren't already a prison and police abolitionist, God, I urge everyone to read what we have written about what happened to Alicia and to others like her, because if that doesn't turn you against the courts and the state, man, you have no soul. You have no humanity, because they painted her as such a monster. The horphobic and racist and sexist garbage that they levied against her. Oh my God. And she just endured.
And she was young.
Oh my God, so young.
I can't even imagine. I can't imagine going through that now, much less as like an 18 or 19-year-old.
Yeah. She sat in county even before this horrible trial took place, right? And of course, Alicia will be the first person to tell y'all that she is not unique and that her case is not unique and that she knows so many folks inside with her for which this is a reality.
Yeah.
And this is what quote unquote justice in this country looks like. And she'll be the first person to tell you that it was not like this system is broken. This is the way it's supposed to work. You know, she'll be the first person to remind you that it's not a system of broken justice. It's a racist system that is deeply whorephobic, that's deeply anti-poor people, that is working exactly the way it's designed. You know, to cage and to make invisible or to try to make invisible those at the margins.
Is it through her story and your relationship with her that you got interested in prison abolition movement?
So I actually came to prison and police abolition through the anti-death penalty movement in Texas.
Oh, okay.
So I had been doing that organizing with the campaign to end the death penalty and the Texas Moratorium Network for quite some time in my youth. That movement in particular was quite gendered in that we very rarely talked about women, both cis and trans, and G and C folk. We almost exclusively just talked about men and cis men at that who were inside.
Yeah.
And so it was through that work that I became convinced that prisons were racist institutions and that jails were racist institutions, and that certainly the death penalty needed to be overturned and abolished. But it wasn't until I really started to combine my advocacy and work with reproductive justice and other kind of feminist struggles for healthcare and access and things like that,
right,
along with sex workers' rights and different feminist struggles, right, and kind of merged those analyses with the anti-death penalty stuff. That I finally was like, wait a fucking minute, what about this hyper invisibilized community? Where's that work? How can I plug into that work? And of course, people have been doing that work since the dawn of these horrible institutions. People have been fighting against these things, right?
Right.
But I didn't know that history. I didn't know that organizing until I moved to Chicago and became very deeply, activated in those new kinds of criminalized survivors, anti-carceral feminist work,
Right.
And that's really where that kind of transition happened for me politically. I felt like I found this missing piece, a politic that I wanted to keep growing and nurturing within myself. And so that's kind of where that change and focus happened.
What are you mostly focused on now?
So, right now, what's been most, I think, useful in terms of my own organizing has been being a part of prison and police abolitionist spaces while focusing on sex workers or folks who are in the trade who have been criminalized either for just survival work, right? For any kinds of acts of survival, for self-defense, you name it, right? Or just being criminalized for the work that they're doing.
Right.
And I think that bringing that into the prison abolitionist and police abolitionist work has been really, really, it's been necessary for one. It's been the most I think fruitful for me, because I think if we want to talk about decrim, right? If we want to talk about what a full, comprehensive project of decriminalization, which has to also mean destigmatization, right?
Yeah,
we have to do
absolutely.
Both of those projects. I think that has to mean that we target carceral systems for full annihilation. But for me, I'm really, really trying to focus on a couple of different campaigns within Survived and Punished, New York, and then more broadly, nationally, which is a free them all kind of mass commutations campaign that we're working on, because necessarily, right, if you're talking about criminalized survival, the numbers don't lie. Every single human being who's being caged is a survivor of violence.
Yeah.
Before they went in, and they're certainly surviving it right now.
Right.
The prisons are these sites of violence. As Mariam Kaba will tell us, prisons are sexual violence, and they are sites of this stuff. They are sites of institutional racism and misogyny and transmisogyny and whorephobia and all of these things. That's why I feel so strongly about this kind of merger of both sex worker advocacy and like workers' rights, as well as, anti-criminalization efforts, right? Getting people out of prison, getting people out of jails, getting people out of detention centers, fighting deportation, resisting the fact that we have fucking borders. Borders are violence. Like, this is the work. If you truly want a world where all people are free to move and free to live and thrive, can't have fucking borders, can't have fucking cops, you can't have fucking prisons. It's just it's not a thing. It won't happen. These things aren't broken.
Right.
Like Alicia would remind me, they're not broken.
Well, I was thinking so much about that as you were talking about her story. Who benefits from criminalizing sex work like this? Certainly.
Or self-defense.
Yeah, or self-defense for that matter.
Yeah.
It's so terrible.
Yeah.
Yeah, and when you say they're not broken, that's because they're doing what they're meant to do, which is like warehouse marginalized people or keep them out of sight and separate or excluded from accessing resources that other privileged people have access to.
When we talk about the erasure that happens, right, in the prisons, like we also have to talk about these police cleanup programs. They say they're going to move in and clean up a park, right, or clean up an area or whatever. And what that means is
who's getting cleaned up?
Violence, incarceration, to again, like perpetuate this kind of like erasure from public space, right? And that disproportionately affects youth in the sex trade, that disproportionately affects queer folks, that disproportionately affects houseless folks, and sex working folks who are working, outdoors. And so it's like this thing, it is functioning. It's functioning for, the powers that be who do deem the bodies of sex working folks or those perceived to be sex working folks as needing to be erased and made invisible, right?
Yeah. And I mean, presumably the alternative to sort of rounding stigmatized, marginalized folks up and warehousing them in prisons would be to provide them with like positive social resources so that
what an idea. What a fucking concept.
They could have housing or secure income to push back against discriminatory hiring practices that make it, so difficult to get a job if you're trans or gender nonconforming, or, to focus on like what are the social issues, the consequences of stigma that create these problems in the first place, rather than simply punishing the people who are already suffering.
That in and of itself, characterizing what the legitimate needs are, right, of all people, especially folks who are cash poor right now, right? And all of those intersecting identities that we've been talking about, like, should prove to all of us and help us to recommit ourselves to the struggle for a different kind of world, because that is not what's being offered. They legitimately want violent erasure.
Yeah, it seems to me that a society that sees prison as the solution views issues like poverty or homelessness as individual issues, and that it seems like the prison abolition movement asks us to think bigger, to see these things not only as individual problems, but as collective struggles and things that we need to change about society.
Yeah.
You were talking earlier about these policies that target sex workers, like laws against loitering, but that have as sort of unintended consequences, or possibly intended consequences, that sort of collateral damage of a lot of these policies are that people of color, trans folks, gender nonconforming folks, people who are, experiencing homelessness, who are cash poor, that those folks more broadly tend to be kind of collateral damage in a lot of these policies that cities enact to target sex workers. And I thought that was really interesting. And I kind of wanted to tie that back to the Survivors Against SESTA campaign, because it feels to me like a similar sort of trend is now playing out online. I mean, Cesta's kind of come up and been the dominant thing that we've covered all year on this podcast, unfortunately, looking at the many problems that it's created for not just sex workers, but a variety of marginalized communities online. But I think that we are seeing now, with all of these terms of service changes on Facebook, with the banning of adult content in places like Patreon and Tumblr, an analogous sort of trend playing out in online spaces is played out in those city spaces, with these anti-sex work policies having unintended consequences for queer people, people of color, marginalized communities more broadly.
Yeah, I mean, I always come back to that Melissa Gira Grant quote about, sex workers. It's almost like they're the canary in the coal mine, but really they're the Cassandra, because they're shouting, right? We're shouting.
Yeah.
And have been shouting. And before the goddamn things were passed, had been shouting from the rooftops about the impact on not just their own communities and our own communities, but on everyone. And the potential for harm. And, the thing about Cassandra is nobody listened. And I feel like there is a shift and there is listening and something is on the move and something is happening. But the thing that's fucked about the online spaces, right, is what is the opposite of online? It's offline. It's in person. I know we're probably preaching to the Ho choir, but like, what happens when you lose a platform?
Right.
If you lose an online platform and you have to go back to your hustle outside, if you've just like climbed your way out of that, if you wanted to, and you were able to do that, and now you're back on your stroll and you've got to now deal with these anti-loitering ordinances, which sure, the NYPD is reporting like fewer quote unquote prostitution arrests, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Except when they're picking up folks who are in the trade under these anti-loitering ordinances, right? It's accomplishing. You could call it whatever the fuck you want, NYPD. Like what you're doing is still going into massage parlors and raiding them,
right,
and terrorizing workers, and you're picking people up off the street who are just in fucking public space. So it's like, call it whatever the fuck you want. People are dying and people are being incarcerated.
Yeah.
Or they're just like, they're being held, without bail. And it's like, we have to talk about what happens when the majority of our community members like are under all of these pressures and they're being squeezed from all of these sides. Like, we have to talk about strategy and tactics of resistance.
Yeah.
We have to talk about the violence of the police, and we have to be unapologetic, right, with our demands. People should look at these anti-loitering ordinances and organize against them, because they disproportionately impact drug-using folks, sex working folks, trans folks, gender nonconforming folks, non-binary people, queer people, people of color, undocumented folks. Like, these things, these ordinances are targeting people who are either in, sex working community or in adjacent communities that we should be just as invested in protecting and fighting for, Yeah.
Ironically, so many of those groups fled to the internet for safety in the early days of the internet, and now are being pushed out of those spaces as well and pushed back into the streets. And so we're cracking down on people in the streets, out in, these offline public spaces, but at the same time, we're cracking down on the online communities that people had built. And so there's just nowhere for folks to turn.
We already see the impact, right? Because regardless of whether or not the first prosecution efforts that come down after Cesta, it's having its desired effect right now. It's scaring people, right?
Yeah.
And it's creating fear in these online platforms and companies to throw us under the bus immediately, right? And that happened even before the damn things were passed. And so,
and not just sex workers, but all these adjacent communities as well.
Right, exactly. And so it's already having an impact. So we have to be very real about what's going on and about the kinds of efforts to organize in response, Because I think a lot of the times in sex worker community, it can feel like you're just organizing against the latest crisis, right? Because there's such a feeling of like immediate survival, or it just feeling this kind of like, oh, we just got through this one hurdle, you know, we just got through the closure of Backpage and now this. And I think that where I'm drawing a lot of strength and support from is in the broader prison abolitionist and police abolitionist community. Right? Because it's like, it's giving me some like trajectory and some clear goals and some clear enemies, right? To go for and also give me some perspective so that I don't get caught up in my own fear and anxiety and in my own, like the hurriedness, the, you know, sense of like, oh God, obviously I'm not prescribing this. This is just what I can speak to personally as an organizer. But yeah, it's having a broader political home and having a broader kind of set of strategy and tactics around how to achieve decriminalization of lives, right? And that means for folks who use drugs and substances, that means for folks in the sex trade, that means for all kinds of adjacent identities, right? For all migrant working people, for all immigrant people, like decriminalizing life, right?
Right. Trans people of color.
Exactly. Like just making like those basically being like, you know, making comrades of and close comrades with folks in other community and showing them why they should be invested and being comrades and in close community with sex workers.
Yeah,
right?
I think that seems really important. I really do like what you're saying about looking to the prison abolition movement and seeing that in all these adjacent communities, we have natural allies and all of the other folks who are experiencing disproportionate incarceration and criminalization, and that like we have a shared interest in changing this system. And I think remembering that this movement, these things that we're trying to accomplish politically are much bigger than our community, and that when you add all of those communities together, like those are big numbers. That's a big chunk of people in this country who are really disproportionately affected by the carceral system. And in that way, it gives us power, just in the same way that like the working class has power in labor movements,
right.
in their numbers, you know, and in their shared experience.
Right. I like this. I always come back to the quote by Fannie Lou Hamer, that's nobody's free until everybody's free.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I think that we have to believe that to win. I believe that we have to just embody that to win.
Yeah. I want to go back to what we were talking about earlier in terms of art. So your background, you're trained as an art historian. What role do you think that art plays in our political resistance?
I mean, just think about how central, I think, a human need creativity and artistic expression is. People might, you know, say this is lofty, but I think that everyone should have access to creative expression and artistic expression, just like education and just like food support and just like housing support and just like, you know, all of these things, because we deserve these things, you know, everyone does.
Yeah.
And I think that all you have to do is look at the beautiful movement art and what it inspires, right? And folks, like, look at Micah Bazant, you know, we carried these beautiful, beautiful banners that had Jessica Raven's face, the artistic interpretation of Jessica Raven, and Nana, another organizer in DC, that had this beautiful, beautiful art. You see them almost waist up with the slogan, "We can all be safe. Let sex workers and sex trafficking survivors live." And you just see their like beautiful, piercing gaze, you know, from coming out from this image that Micah created, right, in collaboration with both of them, in collaboration with Survivors Against SESTA. And this was the image, you know, like this was such a point of power and motivation that I saw people sharing and circulating and relying on for strength. And that's so fucking powerful. And to think about the sketches that Molly Crabapple that you were referring to, PJ, that she was drawing and sketching at the first, to our knowledge, the first ever sex workers town hall in New York, to have those images and, you know, to bring tears to your eyes, right? When you're seeing them and you're thinking about the context and you're thinking about just the fight within that those things are representing. And the way that y'all were speaking about how you felt just being surrounded by the protest signs that became art to you, like those things just recommit me to the idea that we should all have access to this creative expression, and that it's got to be central to the way in which, you know, we organize and create movement spaces that are based in healing, that are based in communication, that are based in being open to lots and lots of different ways of participation from community members, right?
Yeah.
And so, you know, I think about, and I'm not even going to apologize for talking about her constantly, I think about Miriam Kaba's community gallery spaces that she's co-curated and curated over the course of my time knowing her, and even before that, and the kind of custodial role that she's taken in curating these spaces and bringing stories and art objects and installations, right? And making them organizing spaces. They're confrontational, they're inclusive, they're ways for people to learn this history, especially of like the resistance of Black women, cis and trans, right?
Yeah.
Especially of incarcerated folks. The first show I ever saw that she co-curated was called Black Inside. And God, that whole space, I can remember it. I could close my eyes right now and I can remember the layout of that small gallery space and how important, how essential it was that we were all just crammed into this space, just walking through this history of struggle. And like, I think about those spaces and I think about the importance of DIY pop-up just installations and performance, and the way in which we can use all of these things as a way to resist, as a way to bring people to our struggle, you know, as to get more accomplices, as to express our rage and our grief, as places to heal. You know, I have to use art as therapy to heal from my own trauma, right? And like I rely on it for like my vitality,
right?
And yeah, the relationship to my formal training is kind of almost just tangential for me. Like, I care about the stories behind objects because I think that the stories and the people are the most important.
Yeah.
I don't pedestal like objects. I don't think, you know what I mean? I believe in the energy and the power of the people who created those things.
Yeah.
And the stories that they wanted told. And that certainly is connected to the formal training, but God in heaven, did I have to fight, you know, institutions being inside of them and them not wanting me inside of them. And
right. Yeah.
That I know y'all are also aware of.
Oh, yeah.
So it's all connected, but I do think that acknowledging first and foremost that art is labor, and it's such an important thing to defend and to name, and that it's deserving of respect and protection and advocating for, and that it can contribute to the movement and it can fuel us.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. And I love the idea of art being important because it's like imbued with the labor and the stories of the people who created it. And I think that storytelling actually, in any form that it comes or in all of the forms that it comes, is a really, really important political tool. I mean, that's one of the reasons we do the podcast. I think that amplifying people's stories is a way of political protest to humanize people.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think it's really, really important. So having different ways of expressing the stories and lives and struggles of people within our community seems really, really important to me.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason why I think the collective that I'm a part of, the Support Host Collective, I think there's a reason why some of our first things that we made together, besides protests, besides rallies, and direct actions. We're zines,
Yeah.
We're political discussion guides for, we made a syllabus, we made toolkits, we made art objects, we crafted things. And I think that there's a reason why we were so drawn to the ways in which those art objects, right, or those things that I would name as art objects, right? Some people would say base building tools, or God knows what other name that we could come up for. But I think that there's such a natural kind of community building and craft. And so, yeah, like there's a reason why we did Stitch and Bitches, and there was a reason why we made zines and wanted stories and wanted art and wanted that to be such a part of the resistance that we felt ourselves a part of.
Yeah, like solidarity through that labor, through art as labor.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for joining us today. Where can people find your work?
So I would direct people in a couple of places. If you're interested in the work that Support Hose is doing in Chicago and in New York, you can follow us on Twitter at Support Hose, as in pantyhose, CHI. You can also follow our work on Facebook by searching Justice for Alicia Walker on Facebook. And so you'll see that's our page on there as well, to follow the defense campaign work for Lele. Also, if you follow the hashtag Free Lele, that's LELE, you can find a lot of international solidarity for Alicia Walker there as well. So I would encourage people to do that. We have a GoFundMe page to help support Alicia's commissary needs, as well as visitation for friends and family. We also have a petition site that's linked on our Twitter and on our Facebook. And I would like to just give a special fuck you shout out to Tumblr. Right now.
That seems very appropriate.
Our blog is still, as far as, I checked an hour ago, it still exists, even though, it's arguably adult content, right? We're open about being sex workers and accomplices of sex workers and organizing for sex workers' rights. And there's art, and there's tons of stuff. There's political manifestos on that thing. There's toolkits, there's resources. So follow us there for as long as it exists. We're working on finding folks to help us migrate all that content to another site so that the archive is safe. But that's supporthose.tumblr.com for right now. And yeah, fuck you, Tumblr.
For real.
And I do want to also encourage folks to follow our comrades, Survived and Punished, because the work that we do is continually amplified by them. And you can follow Survived and Punished on Twitter at Survive Punish, or on Facebook by searching Survived and Punished. We have websites as well that are linked through the various affiliated campaigns nationally that you can follow, or by following the hashtag FreeThemNY for our mass commutations campaign. And yeah, I want to encourage people to read and be in dialogue and follow and debate and discuss and find community in person wherever you can, Yeah. I think that's been life-saving for so many of us. And I think it will continue to be so. That's where we'll find our strength. We'll find our accomplices. We'll find our co-conspirators. And we'll keep fighting this shit. And yeah, I really want to encourage everyone to find your people in person wherever you fucking can.
Yeah, I really, really appreciate all of the work that you're doing.
Thank y'all. Much love and much appreciation.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us for yet another episode of the Peep Show podcast. I'm PJ Sage, and you can find me on Twitter at PeachSage.
And I'm Jessie Sage, and you can find me on Twitter at sapiotextual or at jessiesage.com.
We would like to remind you that we have a Patreon account and would appreciate your support. Please visit patreon.com/peepshowpodcast. Our music is courtesy of Joe Kennedy. The show was produced by Jessie and PJ Sage.
Signing off. Have a great week.